Hi, welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and I'm here with my co-host, Austin Chadwick. And today we have Julie Lerman with us to talk about mobbing, refactoring, and domain-driven design. So this will be a pretty interesting episode. You can stick with us. Julie, welcome to the show. Could you introduce yourself and then maybe talk about, maybe we'll just start going into mobbing and refactoring. All right.
Sure. Thanks, Chris and Austin. So I'm a software coach. I've been a software developer for over 30 years. So I've kind of evolved into being a coach, I would say in the last 10 or so years, just taking advantage of my years of experience. I do spend a lot of time in Microsoft and .NET world, although as I've gotten more involved in domain-driven design, that's given me an opportunity to expand. I'm even doing I do a lot of Pluralsight courses, and I happen to be doing one on AWS right now. So that's,
Nice.
Like I like to move out and about. I've been really fortunate to have gotten acquainted with and become friends with a lot of people in the Agile community. And that's really how I got to be exposed to mob programming. And I've been at some of the Agile Alliance conferences and some others. And so it's just been wonderful for me to have all these different tools that I can bring to the table and bring to my clients when I'm helping them.
Fantastic. I know that you've focused on the legacy refactoring and things along those lines. And then you and I talked a little bit about mobbing on refactoring legacy code. Can you maybe give us a story about that and what that was like? And
Sure.
how mobbing helped?
So I don't intentionally focus on legacy. That's just people come to me when they're either, getting started or sometimes damage control or, for advice and coaching and confusion. The first time I really took advantage of mob programming was a client who they were replacing a legacy application, but they had started the replacement 2 years before they called me. So they hadn't even released it yet, and it was already legacy.
Again, right? Yeah.
And they were also, it was a company where there was really no software quality practices. There were after I left. Everybody was doing their own thing. Nobody was sharing ideas. I'm sure you've seen some of the like the joke O'Reilly book covers.
Yeah.
And the Stack Overflow one, copy and paste.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of what was going on there. And so they had brought me in specifically to help with Entity Framework, which is Microsoft's ORM. But, once I saw the code base, I was like, let's, back up here. So I spent some time doing, taking a look at what they were working with and talking to them about more modern practices and things that they could do. And on the third day that I was there, we spent the entire day with one group of people. I think it was like the lead architects from across some of the different projects. And I wanted them to have a feeling, an understanding, and some experience of going through this process of refactoring and bringing some of the new elements and not just new practices, but new APIs, because they were using really old APIs and things like that. And I wanted to do that with them in a way that it was safe, right? I was there. I knew what was going to break, right? I always explain to people, especially with legacy stuff, what you end up doing a lot is, you have to break stuff. And I say it's kind of like if your kid breaks their arm and you bring them to the doctor and the doctor says, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to re-break this so it sets properly.
Yeah.
Right. So I use that analogy. So there was this there was one person on the team. He was very, very clever programmer, and he had coded his way around all these problems. And a lot of the code that he had written was going to be redundant thanks to the new APIs, right? If he had started with the current APIs, which were current when they started, they had been given some really bad guidance. Anyway, so it meant removing a lot of his code, which really was making him not happy. So this was a full 8-hour day of, mobbing. So we were around the table, and I was having different people sit. They had never paired, much less mobbed. So, having different people in front of the keyboard and trying to have them have self-control. And throughout the day, so obviously right off the bat, a million errors, right? That it would not compile. But I knew exactly what these errors were. I knew what to expect. We would make the changes, and this poor guy, this young man who was on the team, the whole day, he was just getting so mad because I wasn't, in his eyes, improving the software. It was, I was making it worse because it was broken. I was taking out his brilliant code and making it worse, and it kept, like another change and there's more errors or, still errors, etc. But we went through it through the day, and I, kept everybody engaged and involved, which was challenging, right? Because there are people who naturally kind of take over with, that's a big challenge when you're guiding mobbing, I think, trying to really, kind of tamper down the people who are always
removing the ego.
Yeah. At the same time watching this young guy, and I swear it was not until like 5 minutes to 5, and this was a 9 to 5 kind of place, people who had families and went home to their kids and weren't going to hang out all night. And there was a point during the day where I was starting to go, I know what I'm doing, but this is starting to make me nervous, right? That it, because it wasn't working. And at about 5 to 5, everything just fell into place, right? But the most wonderful thing about that moment was that one young guy who had been so mad because I was removing all of his code and everything breaking, he just suddenly went, oh, he got it, right? He understood the, what we were doing with the code, and the refactoring and encapsulating things and, pulling things apart and all of that. It was so painful for him all day long. But just to have that moment of him, it was working, right? So now they also, the whole process of the mob programming and my being there was also successful because they understood the process now. They saw that, yes, you're going to have all these problems, and these are the problems you're probably going to have, and these are how you solve those problems, and you just have to work your way through them, and it'll be okay. But not only that, but having him get it, like, just this new way of programming instead of just slapping code until it works, just, so that was my first mobbing experience. And I hadn't really studied or practiced or been, done anything with Woody, or, it was just more of an instinct. I've heard of mob programming, and it was just, I was doing it by instinct. The one thing I knew was to make sure that you keep rotating people in the way that you do with pair programming. So, it was just really, really powerful, but leading people. So I know a lot of times mobbing is used to just help teach and also get people the idea of collaborating. That was another really big thing with this company. Everybody was just working in their cubicles. There was no collaboration. This was the first time they had all coded together. So that was also really interesting. But also they'll, it was specific to guide them through it and be there kind of hand holding them so that when they when I left and they did that on their own, it wouldn't be so terrifying or frustrating.
So do you feel like after you had left, they began to communicate with each other more at the very least?
They hired a QA person, not a QA person, I'm sorry, a quality practice manager.
Oh, okay.
Like big time, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
they really restructured how they would work after that, right? And
Yeah,
they had
with
just,
a focus on quality and things along those lines.
yeah. And, I had just gone in there to help them with their object relational management, data access, blah, blah, blah stuff, right?
Sure.
But this happened, that does happen. Like somebody will bring me in to like help with performance issues. And then, like that happened once where I was hired for 3 days on site to help with a performance issue. And we knocked the performance issue out on the first day. And they were like, we're happy to pay you for all 3 days and you can go home tonight if you want. It's fine. And I said, well, actually, can we talk about your architecture? So I got to spend 2 more days there working with them on that, which is great.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so I think what your story reminds me of is something I've noticed with mobbing. Maybe I haven't really thought about it before, but it really eases fear, right? So, I've recently had to go through experiences where, for example, automating something like manual deployment or something like that. And if you haven't done it before for a particular tech stack, it can be really scary because there's so much to learn and so much to do. And there's so many ways it can go wrong, right? So when you're trying on your own, it's easy to feel defeated pretty quickly, right? And so I think having someone in the mob who's done it before, none of us had done it before, but someone had, and their confidence just kind of made everything lighter, you know what I mean? And there were still parts of it stressful where we're still not sure how it was going to work, but mobbing with someone who has done it before really just makes it more enjoyable, I think.
And survived it.
And survived it, yeah. And actually got the job done, right? So thank you for sharing that story, yeah.
That's interesting because that also aligns with the domain-driven design side of things. So domain-driven design, I'm assuming you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so our audience might not have, so
so
you could go into a little explanation.
A lot of for me, the biggest piece of domain-driven design is taking big, scary, complicated problems and breaking them down into small, solvable problems, right? And there's a whole part of it is very strategic, and then there's a whole part of it that's very tactical, like the architecture and designing. Strategic is much bigger picture. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what I do when I'm working with clients and we're dealing with, looking at the big ball of mud, right? And looking at the existing problem domain, because again, it's legacy software. So whether they're refactoring or they're ready to just start anew, looking at the whole big thing and trying to understand how to pull it apart, where the dividing lines are, where the boundaries are, which is a big thing also, part of DDD, the bounded context. And I talk about this in conference talks as well. I spent a lot of time just telling people, it's okay, calming people down, right? And quieting their fears, right? Especially when you're trying to pull things apart. Everything's related, everything's connected, right? So it's really hard. And you start thinking about that, right? And like, yeah, but if we're doing this, what about this? What about that? What about that? And I'm like, it's okay. Let's just, just forget about those things right now. Let's focus on this. We can solve this. And I promise you, we have ways of connecting them later, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that, right? What you were saying, Austin, about, having somebody there that can allay those fears when the stress kind of builds up, right? Whether you're mobbing or doing something else, but certainly in the mobbing, I think that I agree that that's really helpful.
So you have had teams learning domain-driven design while mobbing. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. This was a damage control particular experience where the architect had done a architect and one other person had done all the strategic design on their own and then brought it to the developers and said, okay, you got to implement all of this now, right? And
Good luck.
and
I'll
just
go work on
kind
the
of
next one.
slammed all of the DDD terms to them. And there was a what is that word when everybody on the ship, they like kill the captain and throw him overboard? Mutiny. I mean, they got to the point where they were saying, we don't want to hear anything about DDD anymore. We just don't. And so the architect, who has become a friend, he and I actually have proposed a talk about this to conferences. So, I'm not like dissing him or anything. So he brought me there for a week. It was nice. Switzerland, it was very nice. He brought me there for a week and I spent, I think, the first day and a half listening to people argue, right? And that I wanted to hear what the problems were. And he showed me how he had presented domain-driven design to them. Like he showed me the presentation he gave to them and I went, oh my God, no wonder. Oh my God. Right. Not, it's just not, he was just excited about it. Right. He was very excited and he was just, showing it to them. So I kind of went back and forth with doing high level explaining domain-driven design to them. But also, we talked about the tactical stuff. And in order to help them understand the tactical, I did a combination of, kind of slides, etc. But we were always focused, slides and whiteboard first, we were always focused on their domain and their code. And so once I had given them the basic ideas, and I was working with 2 different Scrum teams who had never worked together before, brought both teams into the room and we did mob programming. What we did it with was we took some existing code, an existing project, that was a small piece of the big thing, and said, all right, what would this look like? We had started a little bit on the whiteboard. What would this look like if we started applying these tactical ideas, aggregate roots, and that, what here would be maybe a good candidate for a value object? And we started just changing the code and seeing what it would look like. And doing definitely there, we were using, what is the tool I learned in something Woody was doing. It's the software tool that says, okay, time to change.
Oh yeah, the mobbing timer, yeah.
Yeah, oh God, that was fun, right? So it really enforced, so I had better understanding of how to use the mob programming, and this time than that other time that was many years before.
Yeah.
So we were using mob programming there to give them the experience of questioning their code and questioning how things fit together and how to design the classes and trying this and trying that, right? And then talking about it more and then see what, try it and see what happens, see what it feels like, see if it flows, like it feels right, right? And then just like trying different things. So again, a combination of talking, giving them kind of high level training, right? Like the generic, what are these things? But then taking that and applying it first a mental model of how those things applied to their problem, and then literally applying it to their code. And doing that is where I was able to really benefit from, or they were, from the mob programming. And then the other part of that was that collaboration, right? Because they had never worked together before, and they had never seen each other's problems before. They had, under their code connects, right? But this Scrum team didn't maybe really understand why the code was designed the way it was by the other Scrum team. And bringing them together just makes everybody more powerful and more able to do their job. So they don't collaborate all the time, but they did decide after that they would get together, bring those teams together, like once a week or whatever, to do some mob programming, whether it was on their actual code or, doing, just taking one of Emily Bosch's. Yeah. Just just doing something, right? Because it's all about thinking and collaborating and working together. So it's just practice.
Yeah, it's inherently social as well, right? And so sometimes it's a good change from just working by yourself all day, every day for those that don't do that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
That was fun.
What would you say? What do you think was made easier by mobbing in some of these tactical practices that you were talking about?
Well, I think similar to that other client, they had the safety net of me being there, right? Kind of that first time. But also they were having conversations about, I think they were all helping each other learn the DDD stuff more deeply and kind of turning the ideas over, whether it's the concepts and how those concepts applied to their code, their classes, and how the classes interacted with each other, or the other way around, right? How when something just like, oh, it makes more sense to have it this way, and then being able to take it back. But doing it together is what made it work.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I think, doing it on your own and then going to a stand-up and explaining it to somebody.
It feels academic maybe until you've done it once or twice, and then afterwards, when you've had enough confidence to do it together, then the academia aspect of it goes away because you've all done it together, and now you understand it coming away from it. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
That's an interesting look at it, because especially this group of developers, they're so smart. And that academic thinking, really, and the other amazing thing was they really understood what was happening with respect to the whole domain-driven design piece of this, and how it was getting them to stop and question how things go together and the impact that has.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a similar experience in my journey. Domain-driven design and design patterns and refactoring was in the academic category of my mind for, I think, a big part of my career, and it didn't really turn into practice. So I'd like read a book on it, hear a podcast on it, and that was kind of the end. But until I did a lab that was pairing and mobbing with it, and I saw it, because it was always too scary to bring it to real code.
I totally get that.
Yeah, or at least it felt like too big of a leap. But as soon as I was able to do it with someone and see it, the transformation, even in a small one or a big one, the light bulb clicked in my mind, and then ever since it's been there. So that's one thing I think that pairing mobbing has helped for me. Another thing that came out that I saw, and I was interested in your experiences too, was I felt before my coaching style, before it was more pairing and mobbing focused, felt a little conflict heavy in the negative sense, where it kind of felt like, I know a better way, I'll code review your code, and then it always felt defensive and argumentative, right? And then when it was pairing or mobbing, it was much more of like, we're all trying each other's ideas, and it'd be like, hey, can we try this idea out? And then we'd try it out, and they'd be like, oh, okay, I see the benefit of that now. And where I think if it was just a dialogue in the hallway or a code review, it would have been, I already wrote the code, so I'm going to fight this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, like that young guy whose code I was deleting
Yeah.
left and right. Yeah. And that was hard. And I thought it was an amazing thing for him to, to get to a point where he saw the beauty of it and he accepted it and he didn't take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it's okay. It's like, there's no, especially, in a lot of scenarios, hey, there's no bad ideas. Let's try it. A lot of times teams aren't given the freedom and flexibility and time to do that, to try things out and make mistakes.
Oh, a lot of it would be the lack of psychological safety too. It's probably like, oh, well, it's not okay that my code's being deleted because, that means that either my work wasn't good or something along those lines. And so it takes a lot of courage to come out and say, you know what, this is a better way to go, and I'm just going to go with it. And because I didn't know it before, but that's kind of like the whole idea behind the retrospective prime directive. Like, everybody did the best they could with the tools that they had at the time, right? Same sort of thing. So that's the whole thing. Is like, whenever I see a large portion of code I wrote in the past get deleted, I'm like, yes, that's fantastic. But having that attitude is, it also can be very hard for people. So it is a good story.
Yeah.
I'm going to go.
Yeah. And then having that happen in front of everybody else.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and just understanding. But if everybody's going through it together, right? And nobody says, no, we're not going to try your idea. Again, it's so much of that is people need to be given the freedom and the time to do that. And leads need to understand that it isn't a waste of time, because there's so many benefits that come out of it. And it ends up being very productive.
So maybe you can help educate me here a little bit. So I'm definitely not an expert in domain-driven design. I've done some reading, done some podcast listening, and done some experimentation. And I guess for me, what you're talking about, driving home the collaboration message of DDD. Do you mind going into that a little bit more? That's a new concept for me. Yeah.
That's really, really a huge part of it. As a matter of fact, it's what really drew me in originally, because I'd heard of I think that it might have been the first time it really registered with me, like the book was, Jimmy Nilsson was getting interviewed, and somebody said at the end, oh, we always ask, what's your favorite book? And he said, Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans. It reads like poetry. And I was like, I was writing my first tech book. I was like, ooh, what does that mean? What does it mean to read like poetry? So I picked it up, and the very first thing he's talking about in the book is about the collaboration with, like, as a lot of times programmers will just go, oh, I understand your business, I'll just write the software and get back to you, right? But so the overall thing is the collaboration between the technical people and the business owners, the domain experts, that you're collaborating all the way through, not just for one day, but for a very good way through. So, I just extend it to, like, hey, it's about collaboration, right? And we've got this collaboration, but then we've got this other collaboration, bring these two Scrum teams together. And that's a different kind of collaboration. But for domain-driven design, it's about the collaboration between the domain experts and, the technical people, and how they can learn from each other, right? Because, when there's important information all the way through. Another really key thing is to continuously be focused on the language of the domain, not the language of the tech, right? And that actually, so that means through the conversations and then even into the code. So a person who's not a programmer, who's one of the domain experts, could look at the code, maybe not read it all, but have a look at the code and still have an understanding of it because the terms are still there, like the class names and the, the behaviors and things like that, the way they're described. So that's
Absolutely.
really, very, very high level.
No, that clarifies a lot for me. Thank you. And I think you're right, because for domain-driven design to really happen, you can't, pull out the domain out of thin air, right? You need to be collaborating with someone who knows it so you can put that into the code, right? And so, yeah, you're right. And so I think that kind of ties into, even if you're doing mob programming, but you're not close with the customer, as the extreme programming and the Agile Manifesto talks about, you'll have benefits, but it's unlikely you'll have a good domain, right? So what are things you've seen that have helped teams be close enough to the domain experts to get it into the code?
Well, first of all, that's a good place to talk about, or just bring up again this idea that there's strategic design and there's tactical design. So there's a point at which, the coder's got to code. The coders have to write the code, right? And then, maybe a domain expert might be there if they still have some questions or whatever, but hopefully by then, they know what they're going to be doing. So there's two things I want to bring up in response to your question. One is there's an amazing practice called event storming. You've probably heard of it by now. And that's when you bring everybody together, or at least representatives from those different areas across the board, right? The stakeholders. So you've got some technical people, and I always say, bring somebody from customer service, right? Right? They're hearing ideas maybe other people would never know about. Bring somebody from sales, right? Bring people from different silos. I've done event storming workshops where people are in the same room that have never met before. They're all working on the same software and they've never met before. And they're having these conversations like, wait, you mean because I did this, when further along in the process, when you're doing this, you have a problem because I did this over here, and it's like, oh my gosh, but I could change how I do that so easily.
Yeah.
Like, we never talked about that before. That's one thing. And the other is there's been a lot of conversations in the last few years it's really coming out of the domain-driven design community and the Agile community about socio-technical aspect of software development, right? And it all goes together, right? How the all the social aspect of it, and you're saying that too. And there are people doing a lot of interesting talks about that, and that bubbles up in the oh my gosh, I talk about this book all the time. The DevOps study, the big DevOps study that Nicole and right? I was at an Agile conference, and it was I actually had 3 slides with it on there, and like every single session, somebody was Jez Humble was there, Nicole Ferguson, Jez, and sorry,
project,
3 people. Like Nicole's like the PhD researcher person. Anyway, so it comes up in there too, like how important all of that is. Nick Toon's talking a lot about it. Michael Feathers, right? Like legacy programming, right? They're all they're it's the big new topic that a lot of people are talking about.
Does it accelerate?
Thank you. Yes. See, I can't. I could have Googled it. Yes, accelerate. And they've actually did. They created another iteration of the study and published it last year. But yeah, it was just, I told you before we started, I'm going to have brain
That's
farts.
okay. We can always we can always add book notes in the
Yes.
in the show notes.
And the third person is just I interact with Nicole a lot on Twitter. I've met Jez Humble, so their names are always like right there.
Yeah.
There's 3 people equally involved in that.
We'll keep it in the show notes. It's not a problem.
Thank you. Okay.
Nice. Yeah, I think what you're talking about, the more you interact with the stakeholders of all different sorts, even the internal and external, it makes it much more natural when in my mob programming experience to say, hey, we just had that call with the customer and he was calling it X. Let's rename this class to be X because that reads how, they would see it, right? So the high level policy reads that way. Obviously, we get to the low level details on sending these parameters to a cloud function or whatever. They're not going to understand. But I think I've seen the light bulb go off the more people in the mob are interacting with the domain experts, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I've definitely seen what you're talking about for sure.
So I'll give you a little nugget about that. There's a term in domain-driven design called ubiquitous language.
Mm-hmm.
So when you having broken up the problem into smaller problems, then the smaller problems are referred to as bounded contexts. There's a lot about that. But when you just focused on one problem, we have like almost a terminology dictionary that is specific to that bounded context. So whenever you're talking about that, everybody's using the same terminology at whatever level of conversation you have, whether you're strategic or down in the code, and nobody has to go, wait, what do you mean? Oh, it's that, right? You don't have to keep translating, right? So we know when we're talking about this problem, everybody knows what the words are, what the terms are. So it's referred to as the ubiquitous language. Just it's ubiquitous throughout anything you're doing in reference to that bounded context.
Yeah, it's and that's the funny thing. Like one thing that when I first heard about domain-driven design, one thing I really liked was this idea of organizing your projects in such a way that it's not obsessed with the technical implementation; it's obsessed with the domain, right? And then that ubiquitous language comes through all the way through from the beginning to the end. And what's interesting about it too is I think when I've been mobbing with people that are kind of ignorant of the domain, what's been really nice is, oh, why is this thing named this way? It's like, well, it relates to the domain rather than having to answer, oh, well, it's some Angular requirement or something, right? And so that has been super positive when I've experienced those types of things.
Yeah, it is always amazing to just be, like I've kind of instrumented getting all those people into the room, but once they're in the room, even though I'm facilitating, I'm still watching and just reveling in what's happening between the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're kind of coming to our time box. And so I just wanted to ask, is there anything that you'd like to, kind of plug or promote related to the things that we've been talking about here? I heard that you had said that you were doing a course earlier and things along those lines. So I think
yeah, sure. Well, I do have a lot of Pluralsight courses, and there's more coming. And there is a domain-driven design course that I did with Steve Smith. It's called Domain-Driven Design Fundamentals. Mm-hmm. And we've had amazing feedback on that course over the years. We're planning to and quite committed to redoing the course, just doing updating it this summer, but it's still relevant. Yeah, so I have a lot of courses on Microsoft's Entity Framework ORM. So people kind of laugh when they see, I do all this stuff on domain-driven design, but I also do this stuff on data persistence, because one of the big things with domain-driven design is like, forget about how the data is getting persisted, right? Like that's a completely separate problem, right? So I actually spend a lot of time researching and sharing with people kind of, when it is time to persist, anyway. So I have a lot of courses on that. What else? Well, I would normally be saying, oh, well, I'm going to be at this conference and that conference, and you can see me, it'd be great to meet you, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I'm just here in Vermont.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been interesting because I've been attending a lot of virtual events lately, and they've been pretty fun. It's a little bit different than having to travel and seeing each other in person, but
yeah. But the reach is amazing. Yes. DockerCon was online. I did a pre-recorded session. During the session, I was able to interact with people while it was played.
Nice.
I was interacting with people online. Then I did 2 live things, but there were 70,000 people that attended, registered, and many of them actually attended throughout the day. I'm not saying in my talk, but so that was pretty amazing also. Yeah, so it is amazing what they're able to achieve with that. But
yeah, it's just different, right? But we are kind of still able to learn and progress as a community, and I found that refreshing in light of things that are happening. But
so how are people mobbing?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So we mob full time. We have 7 teams that are doing that, and we were initially, I think it was kind of like, oh, like what are we? Is this going to go horribly or not? But it turned out that I think it actually became more comfortable because everybody had a more standardized experience. So there were some people that maybe the words on the screen were too small or too big, or their monitor was in a different position than they liked, and things along those lines. And mobbing in person, you had no control over that. And so what we kind of gradually discovered was that as people customized their own environments, and as people continued to, we had kind of a shared server out there that everybody connected to do their work on. We found that mobbing remotely feels better than mobbing in person, actually.
That's really
for a large
interesting.
majority of people. And so I think another piece of it is that people are kind of maybe starved for social interaction, and mobbing is a great way to get that while working. And so
right, instead of just standing there in a Zoom call, nothing personal. This is different.
Yeah, I know, exactly. Well, also even just programming by yourself, I've heard a lot of developers tell me now, I started mobbing because I was lonely. And and so I've heard that at least 2 or 3 times now. And so I actually think that the current situation has made mob programming take off rather than do the opposite of what I originally thought was going to happen. Was it was possible that it would die off because no one felt comfortable mobbing. Right?
Are there other tools besides Liveshare, like Visual Studio Liveshare and VS Code? That right there, like, oh yeah, that makes mobbing pretty easy and everybody in their environment. But are there other tools like that?
Yeah, so I think we talked about tools on another episode of the show, but
I'll have to go find it.
We had one that we use right now is AnyDesk, and so it's just sharing a single computer. And another one that I've been researching a little bit, but I haven't tried out yet, is Amazon's environment, Cloud9, and the ability to have multiple people connecting to the same machine over a browser and deploy to Amazon infrastructure. So,
well, there's a good plug for that episode.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of them out there, and I keep looking for new ones. And so what I'm really looking for is kind of that the ideal environment where we don't have to be remoting into a server, but we are kind of connected either through a browser or something and seeing each other's updates in real time.
Well, that's Liveshare.
Yeah, and Liveshare, Liveshare, and I've tried it a couple times, but maybe no more than like 3 or 4 people, but I'd be interested to hear experiences with that as well. So Yeah. Have you used Liveshare for mobbing at all?
Not for mobbing, but I've used it for pairing.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic.
Right, but it does and allow. I don't know what the limitation is. So there's another idea for a show for you. You know, well, I'm sure the Liveshare, somebody from the Liveshare team would be thrilled to talk
Well,
about
yeah,
that with respect to mob programming.
we would love to be connected with them.
Or just do it.
Yeah.
That would be the episode. Let's just do it, like kind of a Twitch thing, right?
Yeah. That sounds great. That sounds great. Well, okay, so I do have to close this off here, but to our audience, please like and subscribe. If you feel like this episode would be helpful, maybe people are experiencing or struggling with domain aspects of their environment, then please share it with them. And until next time, we will see you all later. Bye.
Bye.